Okay, I'm going to be talking about aggression in dogs, and the reference that I'm going to be using is this book. It's The Domestic Animal Behavior for Veterinarians and Animal Scientists. So it's for the use of veterinarians and scientists. There's a lot of information on here, so it doesn't just cover dogs. It actually talks about pigs, other farm animals, cats. To give you a little bit of an idea, this book was written in 1982, and it contains a lot of studies from the 70s, so they used those studies as a reference. So you could say that they're a little bit outdated. And talking about some of the stuff here, as I start talking about this, you will definitely be able to tell that the information is a little bit outdated for sure. Here it's talking about different ways to deal with aggression. So one of them naturally is castration. So it's neutering, right? So the neutering, this is something that people have been using for a very long time, and naturally recommends this as an option to address aggression. And it does say, which is something we definitely agree with, which is if you're going to castrate the animal, the dog, for aggression, the sooner you do it, so the younger the dog is, the more it's going to curb potential aggression later on, which makes perfect sense. However, we do know that neutering of dogs when they're young physically is not the best thing for them. Just some food for thought on there. Another one is medication. This is something that obviously a lot of veterinarians are going to recommend. But what I like about this is it does point out that medication, certain types of medication, even though they can reduce some of the crazy, reactivity, it can also reduce inhibition. So meaning it can make the dog even more likely to bite because it can calm the dog down, it makes them more relaxed, has a tranquilizing effect, but it also can release inhibition. So think about it like drinking a few beers to calm yourself down, but also when you have a few beers, you're a little bit less inhibited and more likely to open your mouth and say something inappropriate. So that's kind of the whole thing behind that, behind medication for addressing aggression. That's something that it is to be kept in mind. Another thing that it suggests here is high protein diet. So a high protein diet, this is according to Campbell, something that he recommended in 1975, that a high protein diet could have a physiological effect. And what it says is it may increase the level of sedative and soporific neurotransmitters such as serotonin. But there have been no control studies to test this theory. I've also heard, not from this book obviously, but from two different sources. One was a dog trainer, the other is a veterinarian, that a low protein diet could actually do the same thing. Now, I know for the low protein diet recommendation, this is something that other people have heard about and do recommend, but I also know that, to my knowledge at least, there is no control study to prove that a low protein diet can actually address that. The other one is the removal of the canine. So according to this book, it does say when you remove the weapons of an animal, it does tend to make them less aggressive. So if you remove the claws of a cat, it says here that it can make them less aggressive. And it's very similar to the removal of the canine on a dog can make them less aggressive. This is something that is on here, and this is something I've heard before too from one of my buddies. So seeing it here definitely solidifies that information. Other surgical procedures, it talks about lobotomies. If you're not familiar with what a lobotomy is, so what a lobotomy is, it's a procedure in which they would put a long metal spike up your nose, and they would tap it, and they would cause some sort of damage, in your brain, but it would be enough to really calm you down. Now, this is a permanent procedure, and it has been proven to cause so many issues. And that's why we don't do lobotomies anymore, because it was a go-to psychological prescription several decades ago for people. Yes, people will be calm, but they would also be just like not even there. It was just the permanent brain damage that would be done to them. They couldn't even write. Just crazy. If you research lobotomies on people, you'll see that it had very terrible effects. Obviously, this is why we don't do this anymore. It's permanent. And the interesting thing is, I found out by reading this is that they would also prescribe this to dogs. Remember, this is written in 1982. So the information here is stuff that was practiced in the 70s. And it's something that even says right here, I mean, it's reference, from 1974, that although it can only be considered an experimental procedure at this time, intraspecies aggression, so within the species, was reduced to the point where formerly extremely aggressive malamutes could be used in harnesses together. Predatory aggression was also reduced. The aggression of household pet directed at humans was not permanently attenuated, so that the prefrontal lobotomy is not recommended for dogs that bite people. And so the way it shows here is, so for people, they would put the spike up through your nose, and for dogs, it's done through a different area of the skull. But very interesting to me that this is also a procedure that was recommended for the dogs. And it says general approach. So general approach for aggressive problems in dogs would be to try the following treatments in order, moving from one to the next, if the less potent method fails to achieve results. And that is obedience training. So at least let's say that, right? So obedience training. Specific submissiveness training. So when they say specific submissiveness training, I think they're talking about pretty much dropping the hammer. Castration, so neutering. And the treatment with the progestational agents. So basically hormonal therapy, which is something that they talk about too in the previous page. When aggression is severe and the dog is large, dental extraction, so basically removing their weapons, removing their canines, and euthanasia should be recommended. So it seems like taking their teeth out to reduce aggression, that was like something that they would recommend if the dog was very aggressive. And euthanasia, we all know what that means, just put the dog down. Very interesting subject, the topic of aggression, which could go on forever. But I'm glad I picked up this book, really awesome, and I can't wait to keep reading it and maybe bringing up more issues that could potentially be addressed by this writing right here.